For 3 summers of my life, I got up quite early during the weekdays. One year it was also on a weekend, and got to a 80-acre baseball facility where my summer job was. A bunch of us summer help people joined the full-time people. Early in the morning during the week, we would gather in the chained-in fenced gravel lot where the maintenance shed was until it was starting time. And at starting time, we would line up in a big line and walk across the complex and pick up all of the garbage from the night before. Half-drunk pitchers of beer, half-empty nacho containers. Our trash cans were big 55-gallon drums without any liners in them. You just threw it all in there. And we would sweep the whole park and then come back to the shed, and most everybody else would go off to their park jobs, and the few of us that worked there would stay. Usually when it was good and hot, we would take those 55-gallon drums and dump them into the dumpster, at which point the combination of liquids that were in there would sometimes run down your arm. It was super disgusting. Then we would weed eat, cut grass. We would get the little cart with the chalk in it and spread a tape out and stripe the fields. And all of this was to prepare them to make them playable and livable again for that next night's games. Now at the end of the day, we would gather back at the shed at like 3 in the afternoon, getting ready to clock out. And every once in a while, a storm would roll in. And when the storm rolled in, you would listen, and you'd hear lightning, then you might hear some sirens, and then we would all wait for the phone to ring, because sooner or later a tree would come down, and depending on where it came down, I assume if it was in the middle of a road, they called the street department, but sometimes the phone would ring, and the foreman would answer it, find out where the trees were down, and then someone would have to work overtime to go cut those up and throw them in the wood chipper. And all of that is to say, we got paid during the day to make the parks livable again, and then sometimes overtime to make the streets or the park entrances workable again. Now, if you fast forward quite a few years, as a seminary intern at my internship congregation, we took a mission trip to Harlan County, Kentucky, one of the poorest counties then and now in America. And we had various mission projects we were going to do on very poor people's homes. We stayed at a Mennonite work camp at the top of the mountain. And one night, we were, some of us up at the work camp in the afternoon and some down at their work sites, and a storm rolled in. Scariest storm I've ever been in. And we were outside, and kids are kids, so they're running around, and I'm the intern trying to get them to stop running around, especially when I looked out and saw trees doing this instead of this. I don't yell a lot. I yelled at a bunch of kids that day for their safety, right, to get them in. So after the storm passes, we get in the van to go down to where our work site is, tree across the road. One of the other groups tries to get up, different tree across the road. Now, all of these suburban kids and their suburban intern all think the same thing. When's the street department or the parks department going to come and clear the road? And the people at the camp said, that's not what happens here. We have to go clear the road. And it was at that point that you noticed that every mining truck that went up and down had a chainsaw strapped to the back of the cab. We got into the van. They came down with the chainsaw. They cut this big tree into pieces, and our kids rolled the tree pieces into the shoulder there or off down the cliff, and then we went on and did our work. We made the road passable again. Now, the difference is, when I was working at the parks, we got paid to go make the road workable and clean the parks up and make them livable. But when we were on that mission trip, we were doing that because that was just part of what we were called to do. Called to stand alongside these people in poverty and help their homes become more livable. And then part of that was clearing the road and making it drivable. Today we hear a passage from Isaiah, the 58th chapter, which comes from a time when the people were in exile. And in the passage, God has a message for the people. It says, listen, you got to stop talking evil. If, it says, you stop speaking evil, if you stop pointing fingers at one another, and instead feed some hungry people and stand by some afflicted people, then your light will rise. Your light will shine out into the world. You'll be like a stream that's never ending. You will be called the repairer of the breach. I love that phrase. And the restorer of streets that makes them livable. And then God goes on to say, you know, you've not really been honoring the Sabbath. You really should do that. Now, when I hear this passage, because it also talks about rebuilding the ancient ruins, and I know that the people were off in exile in Babylon, I think about how they got there. If you're going to be the repairer of the breach, well, the Babylonians came to Jerusalem, and they laid siege to the city, and they breached the wall. And their army came through that breach and tore that wall down. And then they breached the wall of the temple and destroyed the temple. And then they took the people that were leaders and the people of means and made them walk like 900 miles to live in Babylon, and they left behind a tore-down city in poverty. It's when the prophet now comes and says, you will be the repairer of the breach, the restorer of the streets, your ancient ruins will be rebuilt. I think, yes, that's what happened. If you read the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, like a generation later, they go back. The first thing that happens is they sit in the ruins of the temple. And there are some who are still around that remember what the temple used to look like. And Ezra tells us that they wept. But there are some, probably born in Babylon, who never knew what the temple looked like. And here they saw opportunity, and so they were rejoicing. And Ezra tells us you could not tell the difference between the weeping and the rejoicing. Then Nehemiah gets them all organized, and they each take a place where the wall has been breached, and they repair the breach. They rebuild the city wall. They rebuild the temple. So when I first hear this passage, I think, yes, God tells them, you will be the repairer of the breach. You will restore the streets to livability. But then I keep reading the rest of this and go, I don't think God's talking about the wall. I think God's talking about something else. Because it has this great big if-then. It's not if you go back and put all the bricks in the right places and rebuild the temple and start to worship there again, your light will shine. It's if you stop pointing fingers, if you stop speaking evil, if you give your food to the hungry, if you stand by the afflicted, if you stop trampling on the Sabbath and doing things your way, then your light will shine. So then I have to say, well, wait a minute, maybe the breach isn't the physical breach in the wall, but it's a breach that we have between us and God. In particular, that we like to do things our way, not God's way. This part that says, will you stop trampling on the Sabbath and stop trying to do things your own way and instead do things my way, right? And just as they had problems with the Sabbath, are we really good at spending time with God and getting out of our busyness? Not so much, right? They weren't good at it either. This isn't a new struggle. But then this starts to sound like a deal. If you do this, God will do that. And the Lutheran in me does not like to start thinking about God's grace as something that's a deal that we have to earn. But then I come back and read it, and so much of what comes after the if-then sounds like promise. I will be with you. I will lead you. You will be called the repairer of the breach. And then I start to say, wait a minute, maybe this isn't a deal, but a promise. Now it sounds like a deal. If you do this, then I'll do that. And then I remember when I was a hospital chaplain, I had a patient that moved to a colleague's floor, and that colleague was really struggling to connect with that patient. And so she said, you know what? What if you take the patient and visit with her, and I take mom and visit with her? Maybe we can do the chaplain work we need to do. So we went to our supervisor, who is the closest thing in a human being I've met that is a Jedi. And we told her what we were going to do, and she says, that's a terrible idea. But if you want to try it, go right ahead. And we're like, well, we can do this, right? We're going to do this our way. How did it go? Not well at all. I was in that hospital room for about 30 seconds and was like, and I was out of there. And we went back, and she didn't say, I told you so. She said, well, maybe you try it. And if you think about that, as parents, grandparents, anytime, right? There's times in life where we think we know, or maybe we see someone else who thinks they know, and we actually have been there, and we know there's a better way. And you want to invite them into that better way, but you can't make them do that, right? So she looked at us and said, that's a terrible idea. That was an invitation for us to do it her way, not our way, but she let us do it our way. So if you think about God's invitation to life, God is saying, hey, I've already given you this gift of grace. It is yours. When I think about a breach in the wall, right? Rebuilding the breach. I think of Jesus on the cross reaching out to God on the one hand, and us on the other hand wanting to do things our way and filling that breach and bringing us and restoring us to life. So that when you hear this if then, it's not God saying, if you don't do this, you don't get the gift. It's God saying, can you just try it my way? Maybe if you stop pointing fingers at each other and stop speaking evil and try feeding some hungry people, you just might find that I've already given you the light and that it will then shine and touch the lives of others. So that this text is not an if-then deal that we're making, it's a promise. And the promise is that we already have this gift to live. Now, I have never been impoverished. I have never been hungry. I have never been afflicted. And so when I hear this story and think about light shining into places where people are hungry and afflicted, I hear an invitation for us to enter into that space and maybe find that the light will shine for us as well as for those who we serve. And so then I try to say, well, what might that look like and how does that feel? And the best I can do is think about times where someone has been a repairer of the breach for me. Not because I'm hungry, and not because I'm afflicted, but because I'm stubborn and like to do things my way. And doing things my way doesn't always work out. And then it's helpful to have someone there to restore the streets to livability. And so then I say, well, what does that look like then for someone else's light to shine? And if that light shines for me, then maybe when we answer God's invitation, our light shines and there's just this great place we live. And as soon as I think about that, I think of Coach Beard. Now, if you know I love Ted Lasso, the TV show, you say, there's a Coach Beard. Not that Coach Beard. This is the first Coach Beard. He was a tall, imposing guy with a beard. And I first met him when I was in 8th grade. I was a soccer player, but I was going to play football because my dad played football, and I'm going to do this my way. And I showed up at football camp, as you do, and he came over at some point and said, have you thought about playing quarterback? I had never even picked up a football. I still can't throw a football. Why he ever thought that was a good idea still baffles me. So you fast forward to freshman football practice, and a coach walks out and says, hey, which one of you is the one Coach Beard said should think about playing quarterback? And everybody goes, that's probably Mike. And I said, Mike. By about the 3rd day of practice, Coach Beard finds me and takes me over there, and I ended up playing quarterback not because I could throw football, but because I could remember all 4 plays. That's not the main thing, right? So we get through football season, and it's time for basketball season, and I was this tall in 7th grade, which made me tall, so I learned how to play center. Then I got to high school, and they said, guards, go over there, and I couldn't dribble basketball. So I got cut from the basketball team and walked down the hall. Who was the freshman wrestling coach? Coach Beard. So after my first wrestling match, I couldn't even lift my arms over my head. I was never very good at that sport. But you fast forward to my senior year. My brothers are now a sophomore and a freshman, and Coach Beard has convinced them to play different. You would never convince the littlest people to play the biggest people positions, but he did, and they were good at them. And we get to football season, and one of our coaches' mom died, and he had to go to Kansas for the funeral, and he came back for homecoming. It was a beautiful day, all like we're hyped up, we're going to go win for Coach. And I was not great, and so if the play went this way, I was on this side. And Coach basically told me, don't get any penalties. Well, I got a penalty, and then I got another penalty. But then later in the game, I happened to not get a penalty and make it down the field and was in the right place at the right time, and a guy scored a touchdown. Well, the head coach decided during the post-game chat to make that an example of overcoming our failures. So he's celebrating our win. He says, you know, it's like when Derek, you got a penalty, but then you made a block that led to a touchdown. And I started to cry. Boys don't cry at football games, right? So pretty soon the locker room empties out, and one of my teammates has like 103-degree fever, so most everyone's paying attention to him, except the poor guy that got stuck sitting next to the kid who's just bawling. And he didn't know what to do. So he's like, it's okay that you got a penalty. And I'm like, I don't think it's about the penalty. And at that point, who walks up? Coach Beard. And he stands in front of me for like a moment. And I'm sitting down, he's huge, and he just goes, You need to do a better job dealing with stress. And then he turned around and walked off. And I sat there for a minute and said, yep. Because I had goals, and I was going to meet those goals, and I was going to do it my way, and I was running myself into places that were not sustainable. And while no one else saw that, he did, right? He stepped into that breach. Now, fast forward a few months, and I was not great at wrestling. My career record was well below 500, right? Way more losses than wins. Early in the season, one of the guys that came a lot told my dad I would make it to the state tournament, and my dad went, ha, 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 right? And I said the same thing, but I did make it, barely. And then I lost very quickly to two people. And it's in the Hearns Center where the University of Missouri plays basketball. There's all these wrestling matches going on for the people that are going to keep going. And I walk into this tunnel, and there was these stairs. And I walk, and I just sat on the stairs. I loved wrestling, and now it was over. And who came and found me at the top of the steps? Coach Beard. Did he say anything? No, he just sat down and let me have my space in there. Well, fast forward another 7 years or so, my dad died. And as we planned the funeral, we said, well, we probably need some pallbearers. Who's that going to be? And we had played so many sports, my brothers and I, and my mom was at all of them, and we said, maybe our coaches. So we had 6 of our coaches, including Coach Beard, that helped carry my dad out of that church in that place. 15 years later, my mom's in the hospital. My brothers and I, now I'm 40 years old, right? I'm sitting there. We're sitting vigil. She's all in the machines in a coma. There's a knock at the door. Who's there? Coach Beard. Standing in the breach. And Coach Hamilton, whose wife worked with my mom, right? 2 of our coaches showed up 15 years later. And before they left, they said, sitting in the hospital all day is hard. And they gave us like $200 in cash and said, make sure you eat, make sure you drink water, make sure you take care of yourselves. We moved her to a different hospital because that one didn't have all the things, hoping that it would make a difference. It was about a week later that we finally got the doctors to say, we don't think there's anything else we can do. And we kind of said, well, we figured that out. Can we just let her be? And so they let her be, and as we watched the heart monitor slowing down, another knock at the door, standing in the breach, restoring the streets to walkability. Amen.